Hello everyone, it's been a while, 3 years I think since I sat in this room and talked to my iPad about my stitching, so you might be wondering what on earth I'm doing showing up in your YouTube feed, and I think that's a pretty valid question after 3 years, and the very simple answer is that for the first time in a very long time I actually felt like chatting about my stitching to someone, to anyone. So they do say it's always good to talk. I don't know if that necessarily means talking to yourself falls under that category, but anyway, here we are. So I thought I'd just do a casual chatty video about a little bit about why I haven't been stitching maybe, and the things that I'm working on currently. So as a few of you know, I've been on quite the needlework hiatus for a while. In 2015 and 2016, I kind of stopped making YouTube videos about the summer of 2015, and then I carried on documenting my stitching for the rest of the year and 2016 on my blog. So all my stitching that I finished up until that point is all recorded there. But about the autumn of 2016, my stitching slowed down a lot. There wasn't any real reason for why that happened, just one of those things I think. And so I wasn't stitching anywhere near as much as I used to. And then I still felt the need to have a New Year's New Start in January of 2017, which I stitched on for a few hours and then proceeded not to pick up any stitching until September of last year. So there wasn't, as I say, there wasn't any reason why I stopped stitching. It wasn't a conscious decision on my part. It's just that days of not stitching turned into weeks of not stitching, which then just extended into months of not stitching, and I didn't really miss it. I didn't feel the need, and I guess you get out of the habit of doing it anyway, so you fill your time with other things, which is what I was doing. Then about September time, the beginning of September, I felt like stitching again, so I thought, oh, I'll have a new start, which I did, and I managed to stitch on that for about a fortnight, and then the same thing happened. I just didn't pick it up, didn't pick up any stitching at all until this year. In April I started stitching again, and I have progressively been stitching a couple of times every week since then. And I think the reason why I picked up stitching in April and the reason why it's stuck a bit is because in March I went through a very stressful, very scary, very frightening time. Everything's fine now, but I think as a lot of people do, you've got a little bit of creativity. Sometimes you need things to take you find that doing something creative helps to take your mind off the things you're worrying about, and I certainly found that with stitching. I've always found that with stitching, but it's the good thing about it is that the stitching bug has stuck this time, whereas before I've stitched for a week and then it's disappeared. So as I say, I've been progressively working on the 5 whips that I have, and so I'll show you those somewhat briefly in this video. Initially I was going to upload a video to IGTV, since they've come out with their sort of longer video platform, their sort of rivalry to YouTube, I guess. But the videos they would let me upload can only be 10 minutes long, and I thought there's no way that I can make a video that's just 10 minutes long, so I thought, why not just upload it to YouTube? What's the worst thing that can happen? Famous last words. So yeah, that's why I'm here and not over there, just in case any of you that follow me on Instagram are a bit confused about why I've decided to turn up on YouTube after 3 years of radio silence. So there you go. So while I wasn't stitching, I had a couple of destashes of my stash, so I know some of you have bits that were formerly my stash now in your stash, so that's excellent. There was a point where I seriously considered getting rid of all of my stash, because I'd not felt the need to stitch for so long. It's almost like I couldn't look at my stash. It really was not bringing me joy, it was bringing me stress, having to have it here and not touching it, not wanting anything to do with it. I guess it's a sort of a bit of guilt seeing it there and not stitching, just made it worse. Fortunately, I'm happy to report that I did not get rid of all of my stash. As you can see, the drawers are still there. They're still full of threads, not so much full of fabric. I think a lot of the fabric that I parted with was my hand-dyed stash. Not because it was hand-dyed, and more because of the fact it was sort of 28 count and I'm much more of a 40 count stitcher now, although I still have some pieces that I'm doing at the moment that are in 28 count. So there's a few less threads, but thankfully I didn't part with sort of my Gloriana silk stash, my dinky dyes, my Nina's threads, which are my absolute favourite cotton silks in the world. Yeah, so it's all still here. The other thing that I was really pleased with was when I decided that I could face looking through my stash once I picked up stitching again, is that all of the stash that I've kept I still love. So thinking about patterns, I know a lot of stitchers, when they go through a phase when they haven't been stitching and then they return to it, they look at the patterns and charts in their stash and they're like, oh, this really isn't me anymore, I don't like this design at all. But fortunately that I didn't feel that way when I looked at my stash. I was really happy with that. I'd obviously chosen pieces, charts to stash that I just genuinely really loved, so that was good. Rather than stitching, I would say I do have less free time now than I used to. The free time that I do have, I would say, has been taken up with reading, which is quite funny really, because before stitching, reading was what I used to do the most. Since I started sort of stitching hardcore for the last sort of few years, reading kind of took a back seat, but now that role's reversed. So although I do try and stitch every week, it's sort of only once or twice a week, for a few hours at a time, so I don't make a lot of progress, but I'm just happy to sort of be regularly stitching, even if it is just a small amount, and to make sure that when I do stitch, I'm stitching things on things I enjoy and with materials that I love, because I don't think there's any place for stitching on what you don't love really. What's the point? We just do it for you know, recreation, for a hobby. It's not life or death, so don't stitch on things you don't enjoy. It's kind of a no-brainer really. Yeah, so that's what I've been spending my time doing, reading more than stitching. So at the moment I have got quite a large stack of books that I'm making my way through. So if I do have spare time, more often than not it does go to reading rather than stitching, but I try and split it up a bit so I can do a bit of both, but it's hard to, when you don't have a lot of free time, to balance the two, but there we go. So on to the things I'm currently stitching, which is what this video is about. So hanging over after my long hiatus, there were two projects that I still had as whips, and so I'll start from the oldest of my projects and going right the way up to the latest. So the oldest project that I have, that I'm currently still stitching on, hoping to finish maybe this year, though I'm trying not to get hung up upon finishing things, because ultimately all finishes just go in the drawer. It's not like they get displayed. Not very much. Many of my stitch pieces get displayed, so there's no great rush to finish them really. The only advantage to finishing is in that I feel that I can start something new. But if you're stitching, it doesn't really matter what you stitch on, but there we go. So my oldest whip is a design called the Band Sampler, and it's taken from Sampler and Antique Needlework Quarterly magazine. I've got all the DVDs of the back copies for those magazines, and they are a phenomenal resource if you like stitching samplers, reproduction samplers. There are hundreds of patterns in there, and obviously as they're on DVD, easy to I always stitch everything from my iPad, so it's an easy way of accessing the patterns on PDF and things, so that's great. So I started this one in May 2016. It came in, it was published in 3 parts in the magazine. I'm currently on part 3 and working my way through that. Part 3 consists of 2 bands. I'm sort of working on the latter half of the top of that band, and then I've still got the one underneath. I'll try and insert a picture of what the completed design looks like, just in case you haven't seen it, over on Instagram, where I have been trying to sort of post updates on my stitching, so to let you know that I am still alive and I am still stitching, although it is sporadically. But here is where I am so far on this piece. So although it's it's obviously a sampler, but it's not a reproduction sampler. It's a sampler that's been inspired by 17th century band samplers, which are a type of sampler that I particularly enjoy. This design is stitched on 40 count Newcastle Swigot linen 2/1, so using one thread over 2 threads of the fabric. You can tell I'm out of practice at doing this, it's really odd. The whole design is stitched in DMCs, which is something that appealed to me. I love the vibrant colour palette. I like the fact it was in DMC that I already had the threads I needed in my stash, so it's, you know, inexpensive to kit up for me. And it's mainly cross stitch. There are a few satin stitch areas in the design, a few Smyrna stitches, I think, a few eyelets. There's also an area of queen stitch, which I like. I always like strawberries when they appear in samplers, but you can see there that's a little bit of queen stitch in those, so they're quite sweet. And as I mentioned, there's some, as you can see, some satin stitch sections there as well. But I just, once I got my eye back into stitching on 40 count again, which took a few sessions after not having stitched on it for a long time, this one's a really enjoyable stitch. As I say, the colours are bright, and mostly the colours are grouped together. So for this one, as you can see, is how I've got it kitted up. Normally, in times past, I would have had like a bobbin box full of the colours, but I didn't have a spare one, so I just chucked them all in here. And what I tend to do each session is I keep in a sort of separate, tinier plastic envelope the colours that I'm using on the particular band that I'm working on, so you can see like the blues are together, so I just pick out those colours and stitch those. So that's how I've been stitching that one. So as I said, you can see I've got this band to complete, and then this bit here for a finish on that one. So I don't know how long it's going to take me, but I'll just work on that as I go. So that's that one. Funnily enough for me, I've tended to stitch this one in a hoop. For some of the pieces I've gone back to hoop stitching because I just find it's less fuss. I mean, the Lowry stand is fine, but it takes up space and it clutters the front room up, so it annoys me. So sometimes it's just as easy to sit on the sofa and stitch in a hoop, so that's what I've been doing with that one. So that's that one. My next whip that I've been working on last week as well, I posted an update to Instagram. I haven't finished off the bit I said I would, but there you go, it's one of those things. This is the piece that I started on the 1st of January last year, and then stitched on for a couple of hours and then proceeded to not touch until probably April, May of this year when I picked it up again. And it's a piece by Reflet de Soie, and it's this one here. Now the design name is originally in French. I'm not going to butcher the French language, which I love so much but can no longer speak. My spoken French is ridiculous despite studying it. So this one is called She Embroiders Letters in Crimson. Fairly obviously, you can see from that, it's sort of what I would call a red work sampler. This one is again stitched on 40 count Newcastle linen, this time in flax. I really love the colour combination between the red silk and the flax. I just think it's a really classic combination. So this one was, you can buy it now as a complete chart, I believe. I came about it through the Gift of Stitching magazine, where it's published in 6 parts. So this part I think is actually the 3rd part, because the parts start in the middle and then work outwards, but I started this design at the top to work down. The whole design is stitched in red silk, which was another reason why it appealed to me. At the time, I knew I wanted to stitch a red work type sampler using red silk. It was a toss-up between this one and sort of the selection of Bristol orphanage samplers that you quite often see as reproductions. I'm not sure if that one is a reproduction or whether it's like the band sampler, an inspiration type one, rather than a strict repro. But I decided in the end, rather than there were 2 designs in the Gift of Stitching magazine. One was a Bristol orphanage sampler and the other one was this one. I went for this one. Both designs were of a similar size. I think this one's 250 stitches by 400 stitches, so potentially quite large. But I went for that one because it's French, and I've stitched 2 Reflet de Soie samplers before and I really enjoyed stitching them. They were both darning samplers, which I loved. But the threads for this one are Aury TM silks, and it's 2 different types, so another reason why it appealed to me. So it's stitched in 1 shade of Soie d'Alger and 1 shade of Soie de Paris. So I think the Soie de Paris, which is the 6-stranded filament silk, that one's 945, and then the Soie d'Alger is in 946, so it's just a shade difference between the two. That's that one. So the combination of the two silks is quite nice, because obviously the filament silk has more of a deeper sheen to it, so you can actually see the difference between the two, and it's a nice contrast on the piece, although it doesn't show up very well on camera really. And the other element to this design is there's a little bit of ribbon work at in the bottom bands, I think. So I've got two sizes of hand-dyed silk ribbon. Originally the design called for the matching Aury TM silk ribbon, but I don't think that was available at so-and-so, so I sort of found another silk, hand-dyed silk ribbon. These were from Hearty Craft. All the designs, all the information I'll obviously link to in the description box below, just so that you can have a look at that if you see anything that you like the look of and want to look at further yourself. So yeah, that's those. It's a great design to stitch because you're just using one thread in that sense. There's no, there's not 101 colour changes, and so you can sort of say, I know sometimes I sit and I think, right, I'm just going to, stitch a couple of lengths of thread and that'll be it for today. Finishing sort of the larger letters in the rows can feel like sort of a little mini finish. It's quite easy to leave it at a nice place to then pick up again later. It's quite easy to pick up and put down. So I've really been enjoying stitching on that one. I haven't quite finished this part yet. I've still got a few letters to add on here to finish that little row. Again, hopefully I would have remembered to stick up a picture of what that one looks like when it's finished, in case you haven't seen it over on Instagram. So that's the second piece. Then the piece I mentioned that I had a new start for in September, which I picked up. I've also been working on that one, and that one is Alice Quaker, I like to refer to Alice by Aury TM. I think somebody told me on Instagram that this pattern isn't available anymore. I think the designer has sort of ceased publication designing. I'm not sure. There were a few in this series, I think, but this design really appealed to me. It's a Quaker. I love Quaker designs. It was a twist on a Quaker, which I also appreciated. Love Alice in Wonderland. Anything with a bookish theme I'm interested in. So yeah, as soon as I saw this one, I picked it up. I think I purchased it when it came out in 2016. So when I was looking for a new start last year to try and pick up my stitching, I immediately turned to this one. But in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best one to start with, because I am not using the called for threads. The threads that it's been charted for is DMC. I saw it as a really easy chart to be able to use my own threads and colour choices in, but I think I would have been better off to start off stitching again using a design that was probably DMC, using the call for threads and just cracking on and getting used to stitching again. I love picking my own threads, as you know, but sometimes, especially with hand-dyed threads, what you've chosen once you sort of have a few stitches doesn't always look right. How it looks on the skein isn't always how it stitches up, so sometimes, as I find myself, there's a bit of back and forth between, oh no, this colour isn't right, go rummage through the threads to find something more suitable. So it's not always the best for me. It wasn't my best whip to try and get back into stitching again, but I've picked it up since. I have enjoyed stitching on it. The majority of the threads I'm using for it are Nina's hand-dyed threads, both in cotton and silk, but I also wanted to add in some metallic elements and change around a few of the colours. So I wanted to swap the colours for the Cheshire Cat and the Caterpillar, swap those around in various bits and pieces like that. But this is where I'm at with this one. It's stitched on 40 count pearl linen. And I think the design size for this one is 194 by 249 stitches. So I basically started stitching on the colours I knew for definite that I wanted to use. That was the easiest way. As we come into the elements sort of further down, that's where I know I want to put a bit of metallic, change the colours a bit and all of that type of stuff. So to get stitching on this one, I just did the colours that I knew. So the black, the red, the green, the blue, the flesh colours, I knew exactly what silks I was going to be using for those, so I went ahead and stitched those. So I'm looking forward to picking that one up again and perhaps stitching a few more of the ideas that I had in my mind, actually getting them on the fabric would be good. And again, this one is another design stitched 2/1, and again I tend to stitch this one in a hoop as well, just find it easier. Although there's a fair bit, well, there's not as much fabric with this one as there is with the band sampler. I just roll the excess fabric and pin it to keep it out of the way. It's quite simple really. So that's that one. So the next design I have that I started came as much as a shock to me as it did to everybody that follows me on Instagram when I posted it. And this was the new start that I chose in April when I decided to that I needed to stitch again to take my mind off some things, and I wanted a design that was easy, no fuss, pretty bare colour palette, you know, not too many colours, and ones that I could start from stash. And I decided to start Heaven on Earth design, which I know I said I wouldn't stitch another one. Well, I think I said that I definitely wouldn't stitch a full-size design, and I think I'm pretty safe in saying that that still holds. But this is a mini, and it's a black and white because they're the ones with the least amount of colours, and it will come as no surprise to those of you that have, if you can remember, years ago when I used to post videos on YouTube. It's a Cindy Nielsen design, another one of her pieces of artwork that's charted by Heaven and Earth Designs. You can see one of the Cindy Nielsen designs that I stitched just up here. That's Unleash the Butterflies. This one I'll insert a picture of, just in case you're not familiar with the design, is Mini Unleash the Butterflies. I've had the chart for years, and I just fancy stitching it, so that's what I did. There's not a lot to see on this. I've just stitched the first 2 rows of 10x10s across the rows of pages, and it just looks like grey mush. So, but I'll show you it anyway for the sake of continuity. So this, here's a design. It's stitched on 28 count even weave. I wouldn't necessarily say it's why I got Brittany, it was whatever I had in my stash, but it's definitely 28 count. Same as my other Heaven and Earth designs. It's stitched 2/1 with using Continental 10 stitch, and again, like I did with the other, well, that Cindy Nielsen I stitched using HDF silks. The other Cindy Nielsen mini I stitched was in DMC, and for that one I did the same as with this one. I swapped out the black DMC for anchor black, and I swapped out the Krennic for Petite Treasure Braid because that's what I always do. And as you can see, I have gridded the fabric. I could not be bothered to sit and grid the entire length of fabric, so what I did is I did the first few rows because I know it's going to take me ages. At the rate that I stitch currently, it's going to take me ages to do this. So I basically just use a sulky sliver metallic thread as I always used to, and I've just sort of done the first few rows. As I stitch the rows, I rip out the gridding thread, and then I just use that same piece of thread to then do another few rows underneath, so I'm not spending ages gridding because I just really can't. If you don't have a lot of time to stitch, you want to maximise it, don't you? So yeah, that's what I stuck with for that one. So I have actually really enjoyed stitching that when I've been had that one out. This one I obviously still stitch in a frame because it's easier for the tension and everything to do that. Didn't take me too long to get my eye back into stitching over one on 28 count. I guess we're stitching over 40 count, although obviously this is still smaller because I'm stitching over 1, whereas my 40 counts are still over 2. Yeah, I didn't find it too much of a challenge, and because I'm only using a few different shades of grey thread, you can get in quite a good rhythm. There's quite a lot of block stitching, because at the moment I'm still stitching the background. It's not until I think the 6th row down that it starts getting into the actual main part of the pattern that there is actually something exciting to see. And as you can see, I'm still parking my threads just like I always used to, so that hasn't changed at all. So that's that one. And carrying on the theme of designs that I said that I probably never would stitch again is my latest project, my latest whip that I started in May. I started on the bank holiday the first May Bank holiday weekend that we had here in the UK. And when I thought that I could potentially stitch a little bit more, I had a look around the internet to see what designs I might have missed out on in my hiatus. And to be fair, there wasn't that many designs that grabbed me. I think I've got so much stash, and at that point I was aware of what I had because I sort of looked through to see if there's anything else I was prepared to part with. There wasn't. And I knew how much stash I had, and I was happy with it. And I haven't, even when I was stitching regularly a few years ago, I wasn't stashing at all because I've got plenty and I don't need any more. But when I saw this particular design that was released, I think last year, I loved it, and I knew that I had fabric in my stash that I could use. I knew that I had the majority of the threads that I would need to complete it, and I knew that if I bought it, I would stitch it then and there, because I didn't see the point in buying a pattern just to hoard it. I'm kind of done with that now. So, in case you haven't seen the design, if you're not following me on Instagram, it's actually a Mirabilia, which you may remember I stitched my first Mirabilia, and I think I said it might be my last, red back in 2015, I think. And I do love the Mirabilia designs. I love the dresses and the costumes. I mean, I love those type of things anyway, in actual real life, not just in cross stitch. I've got an interest in like textiles and that type of thing. And yeah, so the designs have always appealed to me from that point. But I think having a bit of distance from that, it didn't put me off picking up this design. So the design is Miss Cherry Blossom, and I love the colours. I love the orange and the pink. I wasn't too sure, I will admit, I wasn't too sure about stitching it on pink fabric when I first saw it. I thought, I think that's I didn't know if that was a bit too much because it's like a baby pink, but I knew I had fabric in my stash that I had kept purposefully. As I said, I parted with a lot of my hand dye stash. There are a few pieces that I kept because they were special to me for various reasons, and I knew that I really wanted to find designs that I could use them with. And so the fabric that I'm stitching this one on is a 28 count Brittany opal fabric, and it's by Jojo Designs. And some of you might remember, if you've got excellent memories, Michelle released a limited, well, she always releases limited edition fabrics every month, and she named one after me. Basically, she called it the Milky Bar Kid for that month, and so it was always holds a special little place in my heart. So I knew that I wanted to stitch something special on it. I just hadn't come across a design that I really loved that I wanted to use the fabric on, but I decided that Miss Cherry Blossom was it. So that's where I've got with her at the moment. There's a bit of a parked thread there, just in case you wondered what's dangling down there. Yeah, so that's how far I've got with her. Really enjoyed stitching her. As I say, the colours are lovely, really bright and vibrant to work on, and fair amount of sort of block colour stitching. So I find that even though although I don't pick up my stitching as frequently as I used to, I can still stitch at the pace I used to stitch. So when I do start stitching, I can sort of get quite a lot of stitches done. The one thing I did find took me a while with this piece was going back to stitching 2/2 on 28 count. I did find it a bit of a challenge at first, which sounds strange, but I think so many of the designs that all the rest of my designs mainly are 40 count with one thread, so I found my tension needed adjusting, and it does need adjusting for some reason when I stitch on this piece, and also stitching with 2 threads again, being conscious of getting them to lie nicely and the whole railroading thing, which you don't have to do if you're only using 1 thread. So that took a while to get used to stitching on this one. And obviously I've got the beads, so it'd be nice to do a bit of beading eventually when I've stitched. I don't know how long it's going to take me, but once I've finished it, I'll go and do the beading, and it'd be really nice to do some beading. I haven't done any beading for a long time. I think the last beading I would have done, it wouldn't have been red, it would have been on Joan Elliott Cinderella. I think that's the last beading I've done, so that would be nice. So that's the bead pack there. I bought it from artanddesigns.com as I did the pattern. I used to buy a few charts from them back in the day. I find that their charts are usually cheaper and so and so from memory don't seem to sell the bead packs, the complete bead packs, and it's always cheaper to buy them as a complete set for all the beads you need in a design. And artanddesigns.com tend to sell them cheaper than other sellers, other retailers that I've seen. So yeah, got those from there, so that was good. And what else do I have to say about this piece? Oh yeah, the other thing, obviously I'm stitching the main part of the design 2/2 on 28 count, but when it gets to the skin I will be doing that 1/1, which is a bugbear anyway. Well, it's not a bugbear. I prefer the look of 1/1 skin. That is my personal choice and opinion. I did it on the red, Mirabilia red, when I stitched her. Did it on Joan Elliott's Cinderella and a few others. Thankfully, Miss Cherry Blossom is not flashing a lot of flesh. It's only sort of her face and just a little bit of neck. So yeah, it won't be too much of a bugbear. But stitching over one on opal fabric sometimes a bit of a pain because the metallic threads get in the way, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So there we go. Those are all my sort of current stitching. I don't work on these in any specific order. I'm trying to sort of keep my stitching going, so if after a few days, say I've had a couple of stitching sessions on a piece and I'm sort of not feeling like picking it up again, I'll just switch to another one. I don't work them on a rotation or anything like that, but I do like to do, I don't work on them in the same order, but I do like to do at least one full stitching session on each of them before going back and repeating. But I just work on what I want to, really, because as I say, I don't stitch anywhere near as much as I used to. I mean, it still amazes me. I can't quite get my head around the whole really not stitching very much anymore, but I'm getting there. I mean, when I think about, it's hard to compare, you shouldn't compare. Comparison is the thief of joy, even if you're comparing with yourself, it's not good. But when I think about 2015, what I stitched in that year, I had a completely blank slate. So everything I started, I finished in that year as well. And I finished 50 pieces of needlework, which is insane. I don't even know how I did it. This year, I'm probably not going to have any finishes. I'm just happy to be stitching. But it's funny because at this point in the year, I haven't finished 50, stitched on 50 pieces of needlework, but I have almost finished reading 50 books just this year alone, which also blows my mind because I probably haven't read 50 books in 10 years. You know, in a whole 10 years, I wouldn't have read 50 books because stitching just took over, really. So, you know, for every con there is a pro, so every cloud has a silver lining. I'm reading more and I'm enjoying that. But I am also genuinely enjoying my stitching more now. So that's great. So I don't know if I'm, well, that's a lie. There's another video that I'd like to film to do with my embroidery and needlework publications that I have. So the books that I have on various different embroidery techniques. The reason being is because I've just recently pre-ordered a new needlework book, which I'm quite excited about. So it kind of got me thinking and looking at my needlework books again and getting ideas about things I want to do. I'm under no illusion that I can do any of the techniques that I have books on. I use them for inspiration and for aspiration. But there are some ideas I've got for new starts, which I'm not going to start for ages, but I'm a planner. I'm all about the planning, not so much about the execution. I like to plan. But I know there's a set of designs, a series of designs that I've got in my stash that I want to do something different with. I want to do some different techniques and things on. Although they are cross-stitch, I'm going to use the pattern as a basis. Anyway, that's all in what I've got in my mind to do. Whether it will happen or not, we don't know. But yes, so in the next couple of weeks I would like to film a video about the needlework books that I have. As I mentioned, I pre-ordered a new one, and I've also just picked up a new one from the library that I reserved, which is a new publication spoiler alert. This one by the Royal School of Needlework. So it's a combination. It's actually kind of really an omnibus edition of the other books they've released, but anyway, that's for another video. But that's what I'll be doing that video on. After that, I don't know. I'm not going to be back to YouTube like I was, but it's just fun. I just felt like catching up a bit, making an appearance, chatting about what I'm currently stitching for a bit of fun, really. Just because I honestly just generally felt like chatting about stitching, which, as I say, I haven't felt like for a very long time. So please don't hold me to making series of videos about various different things. That being said, if there is anything you'd like me to chat about, if you've seen my Instagram and you've seen the designs that I've stitched that have never been showcased on YouTube, and you'd want to know a bit more about them or anything like that, just comment below. You know the score, and I'll see what I can do for you. So that's everything I've got to say on this video. So I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. So happy stitching!